Thank you very much for always accompanying us. To help you grasp the situation quickly and accurately, NoThan-TV-Asian continuously gathers and selects breaking, multi-dimensional news from reputable sources. Before getting into the main content, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and share the video so you don't miss any critical developments. And right now, please join Vo Vu as we review today's most notable news. From war to the 1973 Paris Peace Accords, peace or a historical turning point? Following the 1954 Geneva Accords, Vietnam was divided into 2 military regrouping zones against the backdrop of an intensifying Cold War. From the late 1950s and early 1960s, the conflict in Vietnam increasingly became part of the confrontation between the two blocs. The United States stood with the Republic of Vietnam, while the Soviet Union and China supported the Communist Democratic Republic of Vietnam in North Vietnam. The two communist superpowers provided significant weapons, equipment, and aid to North Vietnam, although the extent and form of support varied across stages. By the mid-1960s, the United States deployed combat forces directly into Vietnam on a massive scale. The war became increasingly fierce, causing immense casualties and losses for both the Vietnamese people and the troops of the participating nations. Superpowers in the free bloc included: United States, provided support and subsequently deployed combat forces directly into South Vietnam. The United States was the largest foreign military force supporting the Republic of Vietnam during the war. In addition, there were U.S. allies that directly or indirectly supported the Republic of Vietnam, most notably Australia, South Korea, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines. Superpowers following communism, the Soviet Union and Communist China, as two of the largest communist powers during the Cold War era. The Soviet Union supported the Democratic Republic of Vietnam with weapons, equipment, advisors, and economic aid, particularly air defense systems and aircraft. China also provided massive support to North Vietnam, including weapons, equipment, economic aid, and logistics/air defense personnel. China and the Soviet Union supported North Vietnam while simultaneously competing for influence within the communist world. North Vietnam also received support from other socialist countries, such as Cuba and North Korea. Besides these 3 nations, there were France, formerly the colonial power in Indochina, playing a distinct role in the initial phase of the Indochina War, later playing a key diplomatic role at the Paris Conference. United Kingdom, a major Western power that played a diplomatic role regarding the Indochina issue, but did not engage in combat in Vietnam like the United States. The Vietnam War was not merely a conflict among the Vietnamese people. It took place within the context of the Cold War and was profoundly influenced by international superpowers. The Republic of Vietnam received vital support from the United States and several allies. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam received enormous backing from the Soviet Union, China, and other socialist nations. Therefore, looking back at Vietnam's history, we must view both dimensions, the conflict among the Vietnamese people and the broader strategic rivalry among superpowers during the Cold War. In 1973, the parties reached the Paris Peace Accords on ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam, signed on January 27, 1973, by the United States, the Republic of Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam. A critically important point is that the accords did not solely address a ceasefire and U.S. troop withdrawal. The document also contained provisions regarding the South Vietnamese people's right to self-determination, national reconciliation, and the political future of South Vietnam. The 1973 Paris Peace Accords, the right to self-determination of the South Vietnamese people. In Vo Vu's view, although born after 1975 in Free South Vietnam, researching the history of the war in Vietnam explains why the people of the South fled their homeland to seek refuge from communism, including Vo Vu and his family. Based on historical documents from the U.S. Department of State, the accords contain a distinct chapter on the South Vietnamese people's right to self-determination, along with provisions on the reunification of Vietnam and relations between the North and South. The Paris Accords explicitly state. Article 11 clearly stipulates. National reconciliation and concord. Ending hatred. Prohibition of retaliation. Democratic liberties. Property ownership rights. Freedom of political activity. The right of the South Vietnamese people to run for office and vote. This is a historical basis that Vo Vu, our respected elders, and the youth of Vietnam must understand clearly regarding the notable 1973 Paris Peace Accords. Why did the US and North Vietnam enter into the Paris Peace Accords? 1975, the Vietnam War ended and Vietnam was unified under the communist regime following North Vietnam's invasion and takeover of the Free South. In 1975, the war ended with the collapse of the Republic of Vietnam and the new regime taking control of the entire South. From this point, Vietnam's history entered an entirely different era. Many who served the government and military of the Republic of Vietnam were sent to re-education camps. Why did the North Vietnamese Communist authorities not call them what they were? Prison camps subjecting all military and civilian personnel of Free South Vietnam to hard labor. Meanwhile, countless Southern families endured profound upheavals and tragic consequences regarding their economy, society, and property. For example, for Vo Vu, the historical upheaval of 1975 is not merely a date in history books. It represents a transformation that directly and completely altered the lives of Vo Vu's family and millions of Vietnamese people. From history to questions about Vietnam's future. After years of war, both the battlefield and political dynamics showed that neither side could easily achieve its objectives militarily in the short term. President Richard Nixon's administration pursued the strategy of Vietnamization, progressively transferring combat responsibility to the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces while seeking a way to withdraw U.S. troops. Alongside the war, negotiations in Paris dragged on for years. Ultimately, on January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. The stated goal was to end the war and restore peace in Vietnam. The United States agreed to withdraw all of its combat forces, the parties committed to a ceasefire and to respecting principles concerning the political future of South Vietnam. But the major issue lies in what happened afterward. After U.S. combat troops withdrew from Vietnam, the war between Vietnamese forces did not end completely. The U.S. Department of State noted that following the accords, neither Vietnamese side fully adhered to the terms, and hostilities continued. The root cause of the issue is that North Vietnamese communists violated the 1973 Paris Peace Accords. Driven by relentless ambition, they exploited the vulnerabilities and vacuum left by the U.S. withdrawal and the cutoff of financial, weapons, and ammunition aid to the government of the Republic of Vietnam. That presented a golden opportunity for the North Vietnamese communists to launch an invasion of the Free South with massive aid in heavy weaponry, ammunition, and forces from China and North Korea. The conflict continued for 2 years after the signing of the Paris Peace Accords. Vo Vu wonders, when the North Vietnamese communists violated the 1973 Paris Accords to invade South Vietnam with the backing of Communist China, the Soviet Union, and international communist allies, where were the signatory nations that guaranteed the 1973 Paris Accords? Everyone remained silent, led by the United States, which had forced the South Vietnamese government to sign the Paris Peace Accords with assurances that the North would not invade South Vietnam. Yet when the North violated the accords, why did the United States and its Western allies in the free world stay silent? Why? Why did no one speak up or take military action to prevent and penalize North Vietnam for violating the Paris Peace Accords? Why did the U.S. not speak out, assist the armed forces of the Republic of Vietnam in South Vietnam, and demonstrate American power? By 1975, Communist forces seized total control, and Free South Vietnam fell into the hands of North Vietnam. Vo Vu asks, what were the United States and the Free Bloc allies doing at that time? Where were they? Did no one bear responsibility toward the free people of South Vietnam? Why? From the perspective of those who lived under the Republic of Vietnam, April 1975 is not seen simply as a Liberation Day. It is remembered as the fall of a young, fledgling free republic, which the United States initiated by pressuring President Nguyen Van Thieu's government into signing the Paris Peace Accords so that America could withdraw its troops with honor, leaving behind a free South Vietnam gasping from exhaustion, betrayed, and abandoned by its ally, a complete overturn of the political system, and a catastrophe forcing millions of people to flee their homeland as refugees escaping communism. After 1975, numerous military personnel and civil servants of the Republic of Vietnam faced retribution from the communist regime, being sent to long-term prison camps for 5, 10, or even 20 years. Millions of South Vietnamese fled Vietnam via various routes, forming the largest Vietnamese refugee community worldwide. Vo Vu reflects that looking back at history is not to call for continued conflict among Vietnamese people. Rather, Vo Vu reflects on history to ask our community worldwide a very simple question. Do the Vietnamese people have the right to determine the future of their own country? If the 1973 Paris Peace Accords recognize the South Vietnamese people's right to self-determination, democratic freedoms, and the principle of resolving Vietnam's future through peaceful means, can these principles be examined as part of the discussion regarding Vietnam's future today? A question from a Vietnamese refugee fleeing communism. Vo Vu asks this question as a Vietnamese refugee escaping communism, having lived in exile for nearly a quarter of a century. If the Paris Accords were signed to end the war and bring peace, why did the war end just 2 years later with the collapse of the Republic of Vietnam in the Free South, replaced by a communist regime across the entire South? If the objective was peace and the self-determination of the people of South Vietnam, why were the South Vietnamese people ultimately denied the opportunity to engage in a free political process in accordance with the principles set forth in the Accords? This is a historical question well worth debating. And what about the responsibility of the United States? At that time, the leader of the U.S. government when the 1973 Paris Accords were signed was President Richard Nixon. If the United States was a key party promoting and signing the Paris Accords, and subsequently withdrew its troops and ended direct military involvement in Vietnam, history fully reserves the right to question the responsibility of the United States regarding the fate of the Republic of Vietnam and the South Vietnamese people after 1973. Vo Vu does not claim that the American people today must bear responsibility for decisions made over half a century ago. However, Vu believes that the United States, as a superpower that was deeply involved in Vietnam's history, has both the right and the historical duty to reflect on what happened to cause the South Vietnamese people to flee their homeland seeking refuge from communism. Today, as the United States once again faces intensifying strategic competition with China in the Indo-Pacific region and the South China Sea, Vo Vu asks, can the United States look back at the lessons of Vietnamese history to construct a new policy, one that respects the right to self-determination of the free people of South Vietnam, defends Vietnamese sovereignty, and fosters a future of peace and freedom for the people of South Vietnam? Recently, President Donald Trump stated on July 21, 2026, declaring that whenever Iran kills an American service member, Iran will pay many times over, adding that this directive has been issued to U.S. military leadership. Looking back at Vietnamese history, Vu asks, if that principle is applied consistently, how should the historical responsibility of the superpowers that supported the North Vietnamese communists in a war that claimed the lives of over 58,000 U.S. military personnel be assessed? Vo Vu does not ask this question to call for a new war or seek vengeance against the people of China or Russia. Vo Vu raises the question of state responsibility and how superpowers account for the consequences caused by their policies. If a nation today must pay a price for actions harming U.S. soldiers, history must also be viewed consistently. Countries that supplied weapons, aid, and military support to one side in the Vietnam War must also be placed within that historical context. If the same principle is applied to the history of Vietnam, what price must China and the Soviet Union pay for supporting North Vietnamese communists in a war that claimed over 58,000 American lives? If the United States sacrificed over 58,000 American military lives in the Vietnam War to defend the independence and sovereignty of the Free South from international communism, deploying over 500,000 troops to Vietnam, only to eventually force the government of the Republic of Vietnam to sign the Paris Peace Accords as a pretext to withdraw troops, then history's greatest question is not merely who won and who lost. The question is, what did the United States protect, what did it leave behind, and what price did the people of South Vietnam have to pay to live under a corrupt, tyrannical, and deceitful communist regime? The South Vietnamese people lost all property, freedom, and human rights following North Vietnam's violation of the 1973 Paris Peace Accords, precipitating the fall of a prosperous and thriving South Vietnam where people once lived in happiness and abundance despite defending against northern aggression. But peace did not bring prosperity and happiness to the people of South Vietnam. Vo Vu believes that had the United States not compromised the Republic of Vietnam for interests with Communist China, the Republic of Vietnam in South Vietnam would today stand as a solid outpost guarding the South China Sea and a staunch ally confronting Communist China in the region. Good news for the people of South Vietnam, from Quang Tri to Tsa Mao. On July 11, 2026, the United States and an international coalition of allied nations, including Australia, Canada, Estonia, Germany, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, New Zealand, the Republic of the Philippines, Romania, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom, issued a joint statement supporting the Philippines' legal victory against China in the South China Sea. The United States and its allies are establishing a clear international coalition to address Communist China in the South China Sea. This signifies that the Paracel and Spratly Islands fall within the sights of this coalition. Under Article 7(b) of the International Conference on Vietnam, 1973 Paris Peace Accords, the U.S. could promptly convene an international conference alongside its 5 allied signatories, who signed joint commitments related to the Paris Accords, to restore the Republic of Vietnam and address the Paracel and Spratly Islands issue without requiring the consent of the North Vietnamese Communists. The U.S. Secretary of War honored American soldiers alongside the flag of Free South Vietnam under the government of the Republic of Vietnam. This is a very clear signal that the Trump administration is preparing for the restoration of the Republic of Vietnam to bring freedom and democracy to the Vietnamese people. During America's 250th Independence Day celebration, one of the most momentous events in U.S. history, President Trump honored a heroic soldier, Colonel Paris Davis. He was a man who fought bravely alongside the Republic of Vietnam armed forces to help defend freedom and democracy for South Vietnam in accordance with America's sacred call. Before millions of Americans and the entire world, President Trump called out the Vietnamese Communists as adversaries, with the South Vietnamese flag prominently featured on the Medal of Honor awarded to the American soldier during the most momentous national celebration in U.S. history. The Republic of Vietnam is not merely a historical topic, it is an unresolved international legal matter. The 1973 Paris Peace Accords are not a dead document, they constitute an international treaty that was signed, guaranteed, and carries clear legal responsibilities. For the United States, as an ally and guarantor, any international treaty, once signed, cannot be erased by silence, nor replaced by one-sided interpretations under the Communist Party of North Vietnam. Today, the United States continues to recognize the validity of treaties signed with the Republic of Vietnam as a state on par with other nations worldwide. This recognition remains published publicly on government websites. Due to territorial occupation, the Republic of Vietnam is categorized as a de jure government in exile outside its sovereign borders. The United States, as a participant and guarantor, carries not only a historical duty but also a legal responsibility. Vo Vu calls upon Vietnamese American lawyers, legal scholars, and philanthropists within the refugee community to establish independent legal research groups to examine the validity and enforcement of the accords under the light of justice for the millions of deceased souls of South Vietnam, millions of fallen soldiers of the Republic of Vietnam, millions of Vietnamese refugees who perished seeking freedom, and generations of Republic of Vietnam citizens. According to the U.S. National Security Strategy released in November 2025 and approved by President Trump, the South China Sea was officially designated as a strategic priority. The strategic priorities were defined in the following order. 1. Western Hemisphere. 2. NATO. 3. Strait of Hormuz. 4. South China Sea. The United States affirms the South China Sea as a pivotal theater directly impacting American economic, military, and geopolitical interests. Economically, the Asia-Pacific region accounts for half of global GDP based on purchasing power parity. To comprehensively address the South China Sea issue, President Trump will initiate the enforcement of the 1973 Paris Peace Accords in accordance with the International Act on Vietnam, as published by the U.S. Department of State in 2026. We, the descendants of South Vietnam, petition President Trump to save the people of South Vietnam from destruction caused by the Communist Party. Following April 30, 1975, which marked a tragic historical turning point of sorrow and mourning for the South Vietnamese nation since the North Vietnamese Communists violated the Paris Peace Accords to invade South Vietnam. Since 1975, when North Vietnamese Communists took control and ruled over the people of South Vietnam, communism has sown endless grief and suffering across our entire population. Every day we witness Vietnamese citizens petitioning and protesting to reclaim confiscated land and homes caused by the communist regime, a plight that leaves citizens insecure, impoverished, and forcing their children into overseas contract labor for over 5 decades. We earnestly hope President Trump will deliver full freedom from communism to the people of Vietnam, just as for the people of Cuba today. Vo Vu and the people of Vietnam must remember, socialism consistently brings hardship, impoverishes the populace, and enriches only the ruling elite. President Trump himself remarked, socialism always promises a bright future, but it consistently reverts to history's darkest chapters. This has never failed to be true, it always collapses in disastrous failure. Socialism is a disastrous ideology stemming entirely from human folly, which is why it inevitably leads to authoritarian tyranny. Socialists boast of embracing diversity, yet demand total conformity. In reality, we know socialism does not champion justice or equality, nor does it elevate the poor. Socialism exists solely to consolidate power for the ruling class. Socialism promises prosperity but delivers utter poverty. Socialism promises unity but produces only deep hatred and division. You have just watched today's broadcast on NoThan-TV-Asian. For all comments, feedback, or topic suggestions for future programs, please send them to email NoThan-TV1953@gmail.com. Vo Vu and the team always value your input and will reply as soon as possible. If you found today's broadcast valuable and informative, please support us by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video with your family and friends. Your support is the greatest motivation for NoThan-TV-Asian to continually elevate our content quality. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye, and see you in the upcoming broadcasts on NoThan-TV-Asian.